Let's face it, with the accelerating shift to the creative economy, the traditional career approach will limit the breadth of skills, experiences, knowledge, and even perspectives that you will need to be successful in the future. So what career strategies should you consider to be equipped to be successful? I'll be right back.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
Since the last podcast, I was interviewed by a reporter for a personal profile that's going to be running in one of the local newspapers here in Silicon Valley. And during the interview, the reporter asks all the normal questions about your background, the jobs you had, your family, why this particular role. But one question that she specifically asked that really got to me thinking about career and how I got to where I'm at from the standpoint of being full-time dedicated in the innovation space was talking about my history and what was it in my career that prepared me for my current role. Now, normally you would get the normal pat answers, hard work, passion, some lucky breaks, you knew somebody. But the question deserved a better answer than just the quick off the cuff. And to be quite honest, I don't even recall exactly the answer I gave to this reporter. But the question really forced me to think about what was it about my career, what was it that got me prepared for the role that I'm in now. And was there lessons that I could share with others from the standpoint of the mentoring that I do with people, and I have a number of one-on-one mentoring, but something that I could share with you here in the podcast. Now, some of these may apply and some of these may not apply, but let me run through what I think were kind of the foundational things that got me prepared for having a full-time career in the innovation and creativity space. First, mentorship. Now, you've all heard me talk about mentoring and the importance of mentoring, and I always talk about Bob Davis, who was the early mentor. He hired me in my first job, and then I actually went with him as a management team for the next 3 companies. We went together as a management team to work together, and so I was with Bob for quite a long time. Bob was one of the early founders in the mainframe software space and some of the early companies that actually then got rolled up and acquired to eventually become part of Computer Associates. But I look back upon that mentoring, and it's not just Bob. Bob was very key early in my career, gave me some very key advice, guidance, and really pushed. It was a challenge. It wasn't about, just mentoring an hour a day. It was, every week going to dinner with him one-on-one, him literally giving me assignments for me to go off and research and study and look at areas that were outside of my traditional career role, keeping in mind that my background is a technologist, software engineering background. And so he was forcing me to look beyond just kind of the limitations or just the narrow focus that as a technologist I would normally have. And it was also very much of an apprenticeship almost. Now, we've gotten away from apprenticeships in today's society, but in the olden days, apprenticing, whether you were a blacksmith and then you were training your son to become the village blacksmith, or you wanted to have a career and you got to be an apprentice for somebody who was a skilled master at something, whether it's jewelry making or swordsmanship or whatever it was in the ancient times. And we don't do that anymore. But in the case of my mentoring with Bob, it really was mentoring, but it also was almost an apprenticeship. He was a senior executive, and I was a very junior 21-year-old coming, in my first job. And Bob actually had me sit in on the senior executive meetings to see how senior executive meetings occurred, how you looked at the business from a broader perspective than just the pure technology. But later in my career, I also shifted my apprenticeships. Bob laid a phenomenal foundation, and for that I'm forever grateful. Mid-year through my career, I got involved with John Sidgmore. Now, for those of you who don't know John was actually one of the first CEOs at UUNet. It was really John's vision that transitioned what at that time was the internet from the standpoint of a research network and really making it a commercial entity. So UUNet was really the first commercial ISP. If you wanted a commercial access to the internet, you did it through UUNet. John was actually my boss at the company prior to that. John left to become CEO at UUNet, but during that time, John also provided a lot of perspective and a lot of training on larger corporations, how to deal with strategies and partnerships and structuring business deals, things that, as a technologist, I would never have any exposure to. John went on to become vice chairman at MCI and then passed away a number of years ago suddenly. And he's sorely missed in the industry. Following on to that, though, I also got a mentor later in my career, Alex Mandel. Alex was formerly the president of AT&T. He left to form Telligent, where I was at. He recruited me in as one of his original senior executives. But Alex gave me the experience from the standpoint of large corporations, coming from AT&T, going all the way to a startup. When Telligent started, it was 5 people, bringing it up out of the dirt. So the point here, though, is having mentorships that also give you different perspectives and different skill sets. Bob Davis, early, young kid, needing a lot of foundational work, broadened my horizon beyond just thinking about how to write better code and how to write prettier screens, to John Sidgmore about how do you structure partnerships, how do you build ecosystems of partners, how do you structure those deals, to Alex, how do you work in large corporations, how do you build cultures that are needed to take small companies and make them big and significant companies. And I think it's through those issues or those opportunities of working with those mentors over my career that was a key first step in the overall structure or overall success for me in my career. The second most important thing, I think, is find the passion. What are you passionate about? Is it technology? Is it software? Is it manufacturing? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Whatever your passion is, you don't have to be a technologist. You don't have to be a product guy around innovation. Your innovation applies to all parts of the business, but find your initial passion and be successful in that initial passion. In my case, I was lucky. I started my career in the early 80s in the software space, particularly in the PC space. So I was one of the early developers of software for some of the first products. I was lucky in the fact that through the early part of the 80s, I produced about a half a dozen products that went on to win Best Product Awards. 2 of them went on to win Best Product of the Year awards. And through that, I had the taste of success, but recognized that I didn't want to spend my entire career just writing software, building products, that I thought there was a broader opportunity. Because in many cases, other people may have come up with the idea. I may have led the software development team. I may have been part of an organization to deliver the products. What I really wanted to do, though, was be the person at the upfront, thinking up those new ideas and really to identify new markets and new products and new technologies. But I found my passion, proved my success in that passion earlier in my career, and that, again, laid the foundation for me for later. And the third, which is actually probably, I think, one of the most important parts of career planning, and this was advice that Bob Davis gave me early on, which was don't get pigeonholed. Don't get comfortable in having the exact same role in the exact same industry. Don't be just a technologist. And actually, Bob encouraged me to change careers and, in fact, change industries. So in the case of types of industries, I've done everything from software startups to technology transfer. I was actually involved with technology transfer from universities in the late 80s and early 90s, of taking technologies out of universities and building new companies. Did turnaround, got involved in doing a fairly large, complex company turnaround, subsidiary of one large industry, turned it around and helped them structure that over a multi-year period. Doing IT operations and outsourcing, managing, delivering a service, very technical, complex service to large companies all around the world. Doing professional services, being part of the equivalent of the big six consulting firms and standing in front of customers and providing those kinds of advice. Being a senior executive, in my case, a CIO at a public company. So again, going everything from a startup to a medium-sized business to a fast growth where we actually built one business from 5 people, up to about 3,000 people in about 15 months. Working for Fortune 500 companies, now working for a Fortune 50 company. So for me, it is from the standpoint of changing careers, changing industries, changing the types of jobs, changing the size of the companies, and even changing the geographies. In the mid-90s, I did a lot of international. I was overseas, both in Europe and in Asia, stationed in London and stationed in Hong Kong. So having that international experience. So the key here is don't get comfortable. In many cases, I made these jumps and I knew nothing about what I was jumping into. I may have had some backgrounds or the right mix of skill sets, but I think it's the variety of the background that enabled me to be successful and not being scared about switching entire industries. So I went from, software companies to IT outsourcing companies servicing the telecom industry to, being turnaround, being a professional consultant to, just that constant change that allows us, or at least I think allows me to have and bring to the table a different perspective. Now, I've talked with many of you one-on-one. I may have talked to you specifically by email, and a number of you have asked specifically around, how do you change those perspectives? How do you get your career such that you could have a full-time job? This is one of those key areas. It's that variety. It's not being in the same job for 20 years, not being a software engineer and you're just climbing the software engineering career path. It's having and moving outside of those areas and getting that variety and getting that perspective that I think is absolutely critical. And again, it shouldn't be a straight line. Bob's challenge to me early on was change your roles and responsibilities, change the types of companies that you're working for, change the size of companies you work for, so work for a variety of size of companies, and your career shouldn't be a straight line. It should show, a little variety in there, and that's what you can bring back to the table from the standpoint of perspective to whatever business you're involved in today. Next is constant learning. And it's not just about learning about your industry or about your area of expertise. It's it's that passion or that fire in the belly that you're constantly out there reading, you're constantly out there learning, you're talking to people, you've got a network, you've got peers in the industry, you've got people that are completely in different industries, but who can give you that unique and different perspective. Now, if you are a regular listener of the podcast, you know that I'm a big reader of magazines, but if you're new, let me give you a little bit of background here. So on average, I probably read between 30 and 40 magazines a month. In fact, one of the early podcasts, if you go back to the 2006 podcast, there's one podcast where I just literally list off just the magazines that were sitting in my office floor on the given day when I was recording that podcast. And in this case, I don't read all about technologies. I don't read all about the industries that I've been in the past. It's a whole variety. And in fact, when I travel, both in the U.S., but more importantly overseas, I pick up random magazines that have nothing to do with the industry that I'm in, just to basically get, again, a different perspective. I'm up to about 200 RSS news feeds, and in fact, I'm probably decreasing somewhat of my magazine reads and moving more and more to RSS news feeds so that I can get the news and get the information online. And it's not so much, I'm not a big, I shouldn't be a believer, I just don't have the time, in many cases, to read books completely end to end. I try to finish between 2 to 4 books a month. However, I read a lot of books simultaneously. I probably have about a dozen books scattered around my house that are in various stages of reading. My wife complains that I never finish the books, which is probably true. But I just find that I may be reading on a certain subject or something may have triggered, and I'll pick up a book and I'll start reading it, and then a couple of days later, something else picks up my interest. And it's one of the reasons why I also like magazines. It's short reads. You can get the basics of the concept fairly easily, and then if something does trigger an interest or a thought, then you can dig in deeper and do more reading about it. But again, from the standpoint of constant learning, it's not about learning just in your industry. It's learning from variety. It's looking at other industries, looking at other cultures, other market segments, socioeconomic groups, or even different political bents. If you're one side of the aisle from the standpoint of politics, read and listen to, albeit it may be frustrating at times, but read the other side, listen to the other side, just to get that variety of the perspective. So again, you need to have that passion in your belly about constantly learning. Next, and probably the most important component for career success in this space, is family. Let's face it, you're listening to this podcast, you have an interest in innovation and creativity, you have to be like absolutely out of your mind crazy to do what we do, to be on the side of inventing, of creating. There's constant change, there's constant uncertainty. You invest a huge amount of time inventing and creating, and you're never quite sure if the management team is going to do the whole ride, or if they're going to get under financial pressure and cut the project or cut the area that you're focusing on and trying to go off and create and invent. We're never satisfied just working on the core areas. What really ignites our passion is the new, the different, the invent. And with that comes change and it comes uncertainty. In many cases, it comes with job and career changes, as I said before. In my case, I've lost track of how many times I've moved. So let's see. I started in Illinois, moved to California, so I was in the Valley, went back to Illinois, came back to California, went back to Illinois, went to Virginia, and now I'm back to California. I think my wife and kids would view themselves as being married to the equivalent of a military career person, given how many times I've moved. And that doesn't even count my international assignments, both in London and in Hong Kong. In both of those cases, I moved. My family chose to stay here in the U.S. I was then commuting from London back to the U.S., and I was commuting from Hong Kong back to the U.S. And it's also the constant travel. If you're about inventing, if you're about innovation, if you're about creativity, you need to be out with the market. You need to be out with your customers, out with your target customers, which means you're not sitting in a conference room in your building. You are out. If you're building products for China, you need to be in China. If you're building products for South America, you need to be in South America. That puts additional pressure on the family. And then let's face it, if you're passionate about an area, if you are just totally driven about creativity, innovation, inventing new things, we tend to get blinders on. We tend to become so focused on the idea that we're working on that we forget about our spouse and our kids. And in case of a spouse that's supportive, sometimes they need to take those blinders off and help you get a dose of reality. You can't be about the product or the idea 100% of the time. You do have a family, but it's that ability for the family to exist knowing where your passion and where your energy is at. Without family, at least I know in my case, without my wife and my kids supporting me over all these years and continuing to support me now, even with my kids and moving out, from the standpoint of just my career, I would not be where I'm at today. And so, recognize the role of the family, recognize the importance of the family, but at the same time, we are passionate, we are focused, but don't ignore. But without family, there's just no way that you can be successful in this space, at least not in my opinion. Next is friends in your network of contacts, business associates. And this is one area where there's a lot of discussion about how do you leverage a network and how do you create a network. And maybe I'll talk about that in a future podcast. But one cardinal rule that I have and I would encourage you to take on is never, ever, ever burn a bridge. I've been robbed. I've been ripped off from in business dealings. I've been taken advantage of. I tend to be very trusting. But even in those cases where I personally have sacrificed significant dollars out of my own pocket, never, ever burn a bridge. The next rule I have when building friends and building your network of contacts is help first. Don't ask. Always help first before you ask. So don't call up, someone cold in a network and ask for them to help you make an introduction or get you into a meeting with somebody that is important. Figure out a way how you help them first before you do the ask. In my case, I always make sure that I always have what I call chits in the bank, little IOUs. Help people first, and then they're much more willing to help you later on. Now, it's not so much about IOUs and the fact that you've got this thing that you hold over their head. Never do that. But it's basically to keep your perspective, keep your balance about what your position is from the standpoint of this new economy. It's not about what you can get. And if it's about what you can get, then go find something else to do, because it doesn't fit with the whole concept of innovation, which is a team sport. It's not about you. It's about the contribution. It's about the idea. And it's about the team. It's about bringing people around you, both with friends and your network of contacts, around your idea to make it a reality. Now, I've seen a lot of people get all wrapped up about it, me, and what is it I'm going to get out of it? That those kinds of people, when I've looked at them and I've seen them and I've met them, and then you look at the success that they've had or the lack of success that they've had in their career, it just works its way out from the standpoint of it. They're all focused about them. They're not about the idea. They're not about the impact of their ideas and their innovations on serving the customers. And they lose focus on it being about the team. So, in summary, what's my advice to someone wanting to go into innovation as their day job, being full-time paid, to be in an area or be in a position where your role is to innovate for your company? First, find mentors, and not just one, but a variety of mentors that bring to you a perspective difference than what you have normally. 2, have passion. Find your area of passion. 3, don't be afraid to change job roles and even change careers and even change industries over your entire career to build up a variety of skill sets and a variety of perspectives. 4, have that fire in the belly to constantly learn. Constantly be out there reading, understanding, getting a perspective, learning new things, because you never know when that new thing is that missing dot that totally reveals a new idea or a new concept. Next, family. Recognize that you can't do it without them, and let them know the importance of family from the standpoint of you wanting to go into a creative economy job. And then last, friends and networks. In this case, help others, pay it forward first, because it always comes back to you. In previous podcasts, the killer questions will tend to be focused on new products or new services. Now, products and services aren't the only areas of innovation. And one of the benefits of varying your roles in your careers and even industries is that it allows you to have a different perspective. So what are some of the other areas of innovation? One is new geography. What new geography could you go and take your existing products and go into where you have to innovate on how you think about that geography? Next, industry structure. What are the assumptions about the industry structure that you're going in right now that you could potentially change and significantly improve? 3, what's the value delivery system? What is the ecosystem that comes around your product or service offering or your general offering from the standpoint of anything else? And how does that ecosystem support it? Who are the players in the ecosystem, and how is that value delivery system? Where can you innovate along that entire value chain? Next, new competitive arenas. What are some totally new areas that you could possibly go into given the skill sets that you have available to you in the business? Next, taking existing products and finding new customers. How do you find adjacencies that can leverage what your core business is today but unlock entirely new sets of customers? And last, new products to your existing customers. How do you continually to innovate in the core space given your current customer base, the current people who are inclined to buy from you? What new products could you go create for that existing customer base? So again, other areas of innovation: geography, industry structure, value delivery system, new competitive arenas, existing products to new customers, new products to existing customers. And these are in addition to just going out and inventing a new product or a new service. So, to round out your innovation pipeline, create killer questions for each of these areas. So, for example, if we're going to talk about geography, killer question could be, what assumptions are there about the specific region or geography that we are thinking about moving into? So if you're a U.S. company and you're thinking about going into China, what assumptions are there about China, specifically about China? List those out. Now for each of those items, what if the opposite were true? So each of those assumptions, what if the opposite were true? And then what ideas do you get from the fact that it's opposite? So whether it's language, how much they're willing to pay, governmental regulation requirements, distribution channels, whatever it is for that geography, list the assumptions of going into that geography or country, list the opposites, and then generate those ideas off of what those opposites are. And you'll be surprised at how many really good ideas just from changing that perspective. What about value chain? So if you're looking at how do you really change that value delivery system, again, ask yourself the question. So if your area is really about the value delivery system, ask yourself the question, how is value accumulated across the value chain? Who are all the members of the ecosystem that either add or subtract value through the entire process? And how can you secure more of the value created? Now that can be by acquisition, consolidation, inventing a way to take away the negatives of the value chain, such as how the buying process happens. But look at the entire value chain. Look at your role. How much value do you actually get as part of that value chain? And then innovate on and create new ideas about how do you get more of the value that's created as part of that value chain. And if you go through and you create the killer questions for each of these new areas, geography, industry structure, value delivery, totally new competitive arenas, delivering existing products to new customers, adjacencies, or developing new products for your existing customers, which is really the expansion of your core. Develop the killer questions for each of those areas and go off and create the next killer innovation. This week's closing thought is about risk. To succeed, you need to take risks. You need to change roles to something you don't know about. You need to switch to an industry you know nothing about. Believe me, I've been there. And in some cases, I've actually gone backwards. I've taken a lower job at a lower pay to move into a totally new industry because I felt it was going to round out and expand my experience base. So don't be afraid about taking lateral moves or even taking down moves to get that experience. You need to stretch. You need to learn. You need to take those risks. You got to get over the fear. And success comes to those who can continue to risk even in the face of repeated failure. So you go off and you do it, it doesn't work out, and you go find something else. Now, if you're earlier in your career, you've got the entire road in front of you. If you're later in the career, then there's the challenge. But don't be afraid to take the risk. I think Michael Jordan said it best. And Michael Jordan is quoted in a magazine saying, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed 26 times. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed." With that, thanks for listening. Send your feedback and comments to podcast@killerinnovations.com. The show notes with the full transcripts. We are now posting the full transcripts of the podcast on the website. So the show notes with the full transcripts are at killerinnovations.com. And also add your comments to the show notes. So if something piqued your interest or you want to share with the other listeners some thoughts based on what is shared in the podcast, add your comments. Feel free to join my LinkedIn network. Again, as I tell before about friends and the network is important. If you want to join LinkedIn network, send an invite to podcast@killerinnovations.com. Please note that you are a listener of the podcast because I get lots of invites, but I only will accept those from people that I know are listeners of the podcast. I've updated the event site within the killerinnovations.com website so that you can keep track of where I will be next speaking. I'm off to China here in another couple of weeks, and then Tokyo, and then Singapore. I will be speaking at the On Hollywood event here in another week and a half. So if you're in the area and you want to get together, drop me an email. Or if you're at any of those events, please let me know and we'll try to do the meetups. Okay. Let's see. Vote for your favorite podcast. I haven't talked about this here lately, but as I've always said, voting for your favorite podcast is the easiest way for you to say thanks to the producers of the content that you enjoy. You can vote out at Dig or iTunes, or you can vote over at Podcast Alley. And don't forget, pay it forward, tell others about the podcast, let others know what you're doing, and go out there and let's create some killer innovations. Bye-bye.